Hello and welcome to lesson 2, and this is the second part of the lesson based upon, and I'll get there with the topic shortly, based upon how does the brain develop. So we're looking at brain development. This is lesson 2 and it's the second part of the lesson, how does the brain develop. The first thing that we need to look at in this lesson is something called the cortex. We spoke briefly about it in our last lesson and what the cortex is. We're then going to look at the role of nature and nurture and how that may develop the brain. And we'll look at the brain of newborn babies and animals and see whether there are any similarities and differences and whether nurture has any impact whatsoever on those two areas. So the cortex, also known as the cerebral cortex, is the outer layer of the brain. As we stated before, it's what gives the brain its wrinkly appearance. It starts to function around the time a baby is born. It is associated with higher cognitive processes and is divided into 4 lobes. The 4 lobes that is divided into are the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe can be found at the very back of the brain there, and it processes visual information. How we found that out is actually a serviceman during World War I actually had a big old pole or something of that nature at least stuck in the back of his head, and he went blind, and they were quite confused as to why that was, and it led psychologists to understand even that actually the lobe responsible for sight is rather ironically at the back of the head whilst the eyes are at the front. To B, also the part of the cortex is the temporal lobes, which are about here and are involved with hearing. The parietal lobe is another part of the cortex, and the parietal lobe processes information and related to touch on the skin and like heat and cold and pain. So it's almost it processes like sensory information in that sense. And then finally we have the frontal lobe, which also forms the final part of the cortex, which is associated with cognitive activities such as thinking, planning, problem solving. And the frontal lobe within our human brain is more significantly developed than any other animal or creature on the face of this planet. So the roles of nature and nurture in the brain. The roles of nature and nurture in the brain development are widely debated in psychology. Psychologists on the nature side of the debate believe that your characteristics and behaviour are inherent from your parents. Those on the nurture side of the debate, even get my words out, believe that your characteristics and behaviour are influenced by your environment and develop after birth, depending upon the experiences you have. Now, there are various studies, as we know, one of them being the visual cliff done by the psychologist Walker, which was related to the work that James Gibson did. And many of the neonates, in other words, the babies, would stop at the very edge of the so-called cliff. In reality, there was a glass screen there, but it did beg the question, why did those babies not go any further? And it does seem to suggest that actually a large amount of brain development does happen within the womb and is therefore falls on the nature part of the debate. However, could that behaviour have been learnt? It's rather difficult to gauge. The baby may have decided to have stopped at the edge of the cliff because actually they have drawn from very limited but nevertheless experience, which would obviously draw to the nurture side of the debate. So psychologists have actually conducted twin studies to investigate whether actually brain development is developed by nature, i.e. Through your parents, or your nurture, i.e. your environments. They looked at twins when carrying out this study. As they took identical twins that share the same genes, whereas non-identical twins obviously do not. If both identical twins have the same characteristics, it is evidence that the characteristics is due to nature. Now, a number of studies actually have shown that the IQ of identical twins are in actual fact very similar, implying that nature has a major role in intelligence. So twins, actually, psychologists use twins quite a lot when it comes to investigating the nature-nurture debate. Another study looked at a pair of identical twins who were raised apart, and I believe that both subjects were 39, identical twins, as I say, so obviously going to be the same age. And what they found with these two these two ladies is that they both drive the same car, they both went to the same place on holiday, they both bit their nails, and it was concluded, therefore, that nature plays a significant role. Whether it plays a bigger role than nurture, well, clearly that's a debate that psychologists have. With newborn babies, it is useful to study newborns because there will be very little impact on nurture on a baby before birth, obviously. Psychologists have found that besides being able to cry, babies can also recognize faces. This implies that nature is responsible for these abilities. I believe there's something called the Moro reflex that babies do when they're startled. They all have this. Does this point towards the fact that actually that babies are actually products of purely of nature, i.e. parental inherent characteristics from parents. So moving on to animals, in one study, baby rats were kept on their own with no toys. This is quite sad. And another group of baby rats were kept in a cage with lots of stimulating toys. So we've kind of got rat hotel and rat prison. Now, the rats that lived in groups in this stimulating environment actually developed bigger brains and demonstrated better problem-solving skills. So their frontal lobe in their cortex was actually more significantly developed than those in very impoverished conditions. This tells us that actually nurture certainly plays a big part in brain development too. What do you think? Guys, can I ask you please, on page 51 on Show My Homework, there is a sheet attached, okay? It's a PDF sheet. Go to page 51. I would like you to copy the key terms, please, and I'd also like you to have a go at the practice questions based on what we've just chatted about, okay? Good luck.